Take your hand off her, Senator. Do that again in my house, and every door this family has ever opened for you closes tonight. Sebastian Kane's voice cut through the ballroom before Imani Carter even understood why every conversation around her had gone silent. That moment was still 2 weeks away. On the Tuesday morning Imani first heard the word Gala mentioned at the Kane estate, and she had no reason yet to think it would ever involve her directly. Imani Carter was 27, black, and had worked as a household maid on the estate for 8 months. She had taken the position for a schedule flexible enough to fit around night classes at the community college 2 towns over. She was 11 credits away from completing her paralegal certificate, a goal she had built slowly around double shifts and a bus route that added 90 minutes to every day she studied. Her mother had spent 3 years fighting a landlord who tried to force their building into foreclosure through paperwork nobody in the family understood well enough to challenge. Imani had promised herself somewhere in that fight that she would learn the language well enough to protect people who could not protect themselves. Sebastian Kane ran Kane Maritime, and, beneath that, the far less public business that controlled a significant share of the city's working port, an inheritance he had carried since his father's death 6 years earlier. He had been 36 that year, younger than most men who inherited that kind of weight, and had spent every year since proving to the senior captains that youth had not made him careless. He rarely spoke to staff beyond what courtesy required. Imani had noticed, though, that he never once raised his voice at anyone in the house, a detail the other staff mentioned so often it had become a kind of quiet legend. Renee Castillo, the family's head of security for 12 years, mentioned to Imani during her first week that the Kane household ran on 2 unspoken rules: work hard, and never mistake Sebastian's manners for softness underneath them. Imani filed the warning away and mostly forgot it, the way she forgot most things that seemed designed to intimidate rather than inform. 2 weeks before the gala, Sebastian gathered the household staff in the kitchen. He told them, plainly, that a United States senator would be attending a fundraiser at the estate to discuss the port expansion bill sitting in her committee. It was a piece of legislation that meant more to the family's legitimate business than almost anything Sebastian had worked on in years. He asked the staff to treat Senator Whitcomb and her office with the same respect owed to anyone in that house. Nothing more and nothing less. It was a phrasing Imani would remember precisely 2 weeks later, for reasons she could not have predicted that morning. Roland Pierce, the family's political strategist for the last 15 years and a licensed attorney by training, stood near the kitchen doorway during that announcement. He nodded along with the kind of practiced enthusiasm Imani had come to associate with men who wanted to be seen agreeing before anyone finished speaking. He had built his entire career managing relationships exactly like the one with Senator Whitcomb, smoothing the space between legitimate ambition and the family's quieter business until neither side noticed the seam between them. Imani had spoken to him twice in 8 months, both times about scheduling, and remembered him as pleasant in the specific, forgettable way of men who were paid to be liked rather than known. Sebastian thanked the staff for their patience, added that the bill would likely determine whether the port's expansion moved forward at all that year, and dismissed everyone back to their work. Imani carried the detail with her for the rest of the day, the way she carried most things that were not technically her business, filed away and mostly forgotten. It would return to her clearly enough 2 weeks later, standing in a ballroom with a stranger's hand closed hard around her wrist. Sebastian had inherited the port 2 ways at once: the legitimate half through his father's shipping company, and the quieter half through obligations nobody wrote down, but everyone in the family understood regardless. He had spent 6 years trying to shift the balance further toward the legitimate side. It was a slow and expensive project, one that made him more patient with regulators and legislators than most men in his position ever bothered to be. The port expansion bill represented the largest single step in that direction he had attempted. It would unlock federal infrastructure funding to modernize the port's aging customs facilities and create 200 new union jobs, letting Kane Maritime expand its legitimate shipping operations well beyond anything the family's quieter business had ever required. Senator Whitcomb's committee controlled the bill's fate, and Whitcomb herself controlled the committee, a woman known in equal measure for her intelligence and her impatience with anyone she judged beneath spending real time on. Sebastian's father had built the family's reputation on 2 rules that Sebastian still repeated to himself on difficult days: Protect the people who cannot protect themselves, and never let power excuse cruelty, even your own. He had watched his father break the second rule exactly once, toward a driver who made a costly mistake, and had watched the apology that followed cost his father more standing than the mistake itself ever had. Sebastian had built his own reputation, in the years since, on never needing to apologize for how he treated the people who worked in his house. René Castillo, who had guarded 3 Kane men across 2 generations, told a junior guard once that Sebastian was the first one who ever thanked her by name for a full year running. "That is not nothing in this family," she said. "That is the whole difference between him and men like his uncle used to be." Roland Pierce had joined the family's orbit during Sebastian's father's final years, hired originally to manage a single difficult negotiation, and kept on for 15 years after that negotiation went well beyond anyone's expectations. He had shepherded 3 mayors, 2 governors, and now a sitting senator through relationships with the Kane family. Each one required years of careful cultivation and left Roland's own name attached to nothing anyone outside the family would ever recognize. He had asked Sebastian once, early that same year, whether the family might consider backing his own run for a city council seat once the port bill passed. Sebastian had taken the request under advisement and never formally answered. Roland had not raised the subject again. René noticed, though, that he mentioned the council seat once at a dinner that spring, in the testing tone of a man measuring, before he had even asked, how much support already existed for the idea. Imani knew none of this the week before the gala, occupied instead with final exam preparation for a contracts course that had consumed most of her free evenings that month. She had confided in Josephine, the estate's cook, that she was nervous about a practice exam covering the exact kind of clause language she would need to recognize instantly once she actually worked in a law office. Josephine had laughed and said the gala would probably teach her more about contracts than any exam, watching how carefully men like Roland worded every promise they made in that house. Imani had laughed too, not yet understanding how literally that joke would turn out to be true. By the Friday before the gala, invitations had been confirmed, the guest list finalized at just under 60 names. Roland had personally reviewed every seating arrangement twice, the kind of attention to detail that struck René, in hindsight, as slightly more than the occasion required. René spent the week before the gala running the estate's security the way she ran every major event. She walked the grounds twice daily and reviewed the guest list against 3 separate background databases, out of habit more than any specific concern. One name gave her pause without quite becoming a problem: a junior associate from the Hensley Group. It was a real estate development firm that had bid unsuccessfully against Kane Maritime for the same port-adjacent parcels twice in the last 3 years. Roland had added the associate to the guest list personally, explaining to René that maintaining cordial relationships with rival bidders was simply good, ordinary practice in a business built on relationships that outlasted any single deal. René noted it and moved on, the way she noted most things that came with a smooth enough explanation already attached. It was a habit that had served her well across 12 years of oversights that turned out to matter and oversights that never did. Imani spent that same week learning the gala's service protocol from the estate's longtime butler, memorizing which senior staff handled which section of the ballroom and which guests received particular attention throughout the night. She was assigned to the West Wing reception area, a role that mostly meant refreshing drinks and directing guests toward the coat room, work she had done at smaller events before, always trouble-free. On Wednesday evening, finishing a late shift, she found Sebastian in the estate's library reviewing testimony transcripts from an earlier committee hearing, preparing arguments for conversations he might need to have that weekend. He asked her opinion on a phrase in one paragraph, half joking, and she gave him a genuine answer anyway, pointing out that the wording left an opening a hostile committee member could exploit easily. Sebastian looked up at her with an expression she had not seen from him before, something between surprise and real attention. "You just did in 10 seconds what I paid 2 lawyers a full week to catch," he said. "It is a rare thing, finding someone who reads a contract the way you just read that one. Where did you learn to read language like that?" Imani told him about her paralegal classes, briefly, expecting the conversation to end there the way most conversations with the family ended once she mentioned anything about her life outside the house. Instead, he asked 3 more questions. listened to every answer completely, and thanked her before she left the room. The kind of attention that stayed with her longer than she wanted to admit to herself. She replayed the conversation twice on her walk home that night, turning over the particular way he had looked at her, half convinced she had imagined the weight of it by the time she reached her building. That same Wednesday night, while after most of the household had gone to bed, Renee's assistant noted an unfamiliar car parked near the service entrance for nearly 40 minutes, gone before anyone thought to check the plate. Renee reviewed the footage the next morning and recognized the driver from a photograph in the Hensley Group's public staff directory, the same junior associate Roland had added to the guest list himself. She mentioned it to Roland directly, expecting an easy explanation. Roland said the associate had dropped off a courtesy gift ahead of the gala, a bottle of wine meant to smooth over old bidding war tension before Saturday night. Renee found the story plausible enough on its surface to let it stand, though she kept the timestamp logged, out of the same habit that made her check 3 databases instead of 1. By Saturday afternoon, the ballroom had been transformed, string lights threaded through the garden trellises, and the string quartet tuning quietly near the terrace doors. Imani pressed her uniform twice, more carefully than the job required. She told herself it was only because a senator would be watching, not because Sebastian would be in the room all night for the first time since that library conversation. Senator Diane Whitcomb arrived fashionably late, trailed by 2 aides and an energy that filled a room before she said a single word. She was 53, sharp in a way that made junior staffers visibly nervous, and known across the Capitol for a work ethic that left little patience for anyone she judged unable to keep pace with her. Sebastian greeted her personally at the door. The ballroom, transformed for the evening, glittered under string lights strung between the garden trellises. 60 guests moved through it in formal wear that made the household staff nearly invisible by comparison, precisely the effect most of them preferred on a night like this. For the first hour, the evening proceeded precisely the way Roland had planned it. Whitcomb was charmed by the string quartet, impressed by the harbor view from the terrace, and warming steadily toward a bill she had arrived viewing with mild skepticism. Imani crossed paths with the senator twice in that first hour, refreshing a drink once and directing an aide toward the coat room once. Both interactions brief and unremarkable at the time. The wine began, flowing more freely after the second hour. Whitcomb allowed herself more of it than she usually risked in public, the kind of small lapse a long week in Washington made easy to justify in the moment. Her charm, Imani noticed from across the room, began to sharpen at the edges. A junior aide misplaced a folder of talking points near the terrace doors around 9, and Whitcomb's voice, when she noticed, carried further than she likely intended, sharp enough that 3 nearby conversations paused to listen in. Roland moved through the room all evening with the practiced ease of a man managing a dozen small currents at once. He refilled Whitcomb's wine personally more than once, laughed at comments that were not especially funny, and steered her steadily toward Sebastian whenever her attention wandered. Imani noticed him glance toward the terrace doors twice within the same 10 minutes. He checked his phone each time with a focus that did not match the easy performance he wore for everyone else in the room. She thought nothing of it, too occupied refilling a tray of glasses near the West Wing entrance, unaware that the night's real complication had already begun taking shape somewhere she could not see. Near 10 o'clock, Whitcomb crossed into the West Wing reception area looking for the coat room herself, her aide having disappeared to handle the misplaced folder somewhere else in the house. She spotted Imani near the drink station and, without slowing her stride, reached out and closed her hand hard around Imani's wrist to redirect her attention fully. "I need someone who actually knows where things are kept in this house," she said, loud enough that 2 nearby guests turned to look at them. "Not someone who just stands there uselessly." Imani felt the grip tighten before she had time to fully register what was happening, the senator's rings pressing hard enough into her skin to leave a mark that would still be visible the next morning. "You can let go of my arm now," Imani said, her voice even and clear despite the sting climbing up her wrist. Whitcomb's grip did not loosen. Across the room, close enough to have heard every word of it, Sebastian Kane set down his glass and began walking toward them both. Sebastian crossed the ballroom faster than anyone in the room had ever seen him move, his voice already low and controlled by the time he reached them, though every word carried clearly. Take your hand off her, Senator. Do that again in my house, and every door this family has ever opened for you closes tonight. The room around them went quiet in layers, conversation dying outward from the West Wing entrance until even the orchestra seemed to notice, its final note trailing off half a beat early. Whitcomb released Imani's wrist immediately, more startled than chastened. Her expression cycled fast through confusion, embarrassment, and finally something colder, as she registered how many guests had just watched a sitting senator get corrected in front of them. I did not realize she required an introduction, Whitcomb said, recovering enough composure to sound imperious rather than caught out. She works in my house, Sebastian said. That is introduction enough for anyone standing in it tonight. Roland appeared at Sebastian's shoulder within seconds, already reaching for the practiced smile that had smoothed over 100 smaller crises, already opening his mouth to redirect the moment towards safer ground. Sebastian did not look at him. He looked at Imani instead and asked, quietly enough that it belonged only to her, whether she was hurt. She is fine, Whitcomb answered before Imani could speak. I asked her, Sebastian said, his eyes not leaving Imani. Imani said she was fine, though her wrist still throbbed faintly, and told him, honestly, that she had already asked the senator to let go before he arrived. I heard, he said. I came anyway. Whitcomb left the West Wing without another word, her aides trailing behind her in a tight, anxious formation, and the party resumed its noise slowly, guests returning to conversations they had abandoned mid-sentence moments earlier. Roland caught Sebastian's arm before he could follow Imani back toward the kitchen, his voice low and urgent in a way Imani had not heard from him before that night. Sebastian, that bill needed her goodwill more than it needed a point made in front of. 60 donors, he said. Sebastian told him, evenly, that some points were worth making regardless of what they cost, and walked away before Roland could answer him further. Imani spent the rest of the gala in the kitchen with Josephine, her wrist iced under a dish towel. She kept replaying the 10 seconds that had just made her, however briefly, the most talked about person at a United States Senator's fundraiser. By the time the last guests left near midnight, the story had already traveled through the household staff twice over, embellished slightly with each retelling, though the core of it needed no embellishment at all. Renee found Imani in the kitchen near 11, checked her wrist before asking permission, the particular briskness of a woman who had tended small injuries far more serious than this one. It will bruise, she said. It will also be the best thing that happened at this party, whether the senator agrees or not. Imani asked what she meant. Renee said that in 12 years of working in that house, she had never once seen Sebastian cross a room that fast for anyone, and that whatever it meant, it was worth paying attention to closely. Sebastian found her 20 minutes later, having finally seen the last guest to their car. He asked again whether she was truly all right, his voice quieter now that the room had emptied of everyone who might be watching. Imani told him the truth, that the bruise did not scare her nearly as much as the 60 faces that had turned to watch a senator lose an argument to a housekeeper. That is not what happened tonight, he told her. What happened tonight was a senator learning that this house has a floor beneath which nobody, guest or staff, gets treated as beneath notice. He left before she could find an answer to that. Imani stood alone in the empty kitchen for a long moment, her wrist aching faintly, turning the sentence over in her mind long after the house had gone dark. Roland spent Sunday morning calling Sebastian twice before 9, each call more urgent than the last. He insisted the port bill was now effectively dead unless Sebastian made a public gesture of apology to Whitcomb before the week's committee session. Sebastian refused both times, telling Roland he would express regret that the confrontation became public, but that he would not retract a word of what he had said. Roland's third call, placed just after 10, suggested that if Sebastian would not make the gesture himself, perhaps Roland could smooth things over privately with the senator's office. It was a phrase that struck Sebastian as strange only in hindsight, once he had reason to look back on the morning. Renee reviewed the gala's full security footage that same Sunday afternoon, partly out of routine and partly because Roland's urgency the night before had not sat right with her. She found the footage of Roland's brief exchange with Sebastian in the West Wing, then kept watching. 11 minutes later, she found more. Roland stepping onto the terrace alone, phone pressed to his ear, speaking for nearly 6 minutes to someone the footage could not identify. His body language stayed calm in a way that did not match a man managing a crisis he had described as urgent to Sebastian only minutes earlier that same evening. Because Roland carried a company-issued phone, Renee was able to match the terrace call's timing against Kane Maritime's device records, a system Sebastian's father had insisted on years earlier and never bothered removing since. The records showed a 6-minute outgoing call placed to a number registered to the Hensley Group's main office, the same firm whose junior associate had visited the service entrance 3 nights before the party began. Renee did not yet know what the call contained, only that its existence contradicted the version of that phone call Roland had described to Sebastian as coordinating hotel arrangements for an out-of-town donor. Imani, meanwhile, spent Monday finishing the deep clean of the estate study, a task that fell to her whenever a major event left the household running behind on ordinary chores. Sebastian had asked her that morning to gather any loose paperwork from the weekend into labeled folders for his assistant, a task that put her hands on every document left out since Thursday. She found a folder left open on the reading table, half tucked beneath. A stack of committee testimony, containing what looked at first like a standard non-disclosure agreement between 2 firms. Her contracts class had spent 3 weeks that semester on indemnification clauses specifically, enough that one paragraph caught her attention before she even meant to read closely. It was a clause naming the Hensley Group as an indemnified party in an arrangement dated 9 days earlier. That was 5 days before the gala, and 4 days before Roland told Renee the Hensley visit was only a courtesy gift delivery. She read the paragraph twice to be certain she had not misunderstood it, and closed the folder exactly as she had found it. She carried the detail with her the rest of the afternoon, the same way she had once carried Roland's careless comment about council seats, filed away until it mattered enough to say out loud. Imani found Renee in the security office late Monday afternoon and described the folder as precisely as she could remember it, including the date and the indemnification language that had caught her attention immediately. Renee asked her to write down everything she remembered while it was fresh, then pulled up the terrace phone log again, laying it beside Imani's account of the NDA's date. 9 days earlier, Renee said. That is 2 days before Roland ever added the Hensley associate to our guest list at all. Imani asked what that meant. It means, Renee said, he was already negotiating with them before he ever pretended the invitation was about smoothing over old business between rivals. Renee brought both pieces to Sebastian that evening, laying out the timeline and softening none of it for him. Sebastian listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable until Renee finished, at which point he asked only one question. What was in the arrangement for Roland personally? Renee said she did not know yet, though the shape of it seemed obvious enough to guess correctly. Sebastian remembered. Then, the council seat Roland had asked about that spring, and the 2 mentions Renee had overheard him make to captains who might carry the idea forward on his behalf. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected call from Whitcomb's chief of staff, requesting a private conversation before the week's committee session, a tone entirely different from the office's usual formal correspondence. Sebastian took the call himself. Whitcomb, it turned out, had already been leaning towards supporting the bill before Saturday ever happened, and had spent the weekend hearing from 3 separate donors who described the incident with something closer to admiration than scandal. She wanted, her chief of staff said carefully, to discuss the bill again, now that the noise of Saturday night had settled. Sebastian agreed to meet her Thursday, 2 days before the council he had already decided to convene over Roland. Renee spent Tuesday and Wednesday building the rest of the case, tracing the indemnification arrangement through a shell entity Roland had used before for smaller consulting side deals. A contact at the county clerk's office confirmed Roland's name appeared, buried 3 signatures deep, as an authorized representative on the Hensley filing. By Wednesday night, she had enough to lay in front of the family's senior partners and stand behind every word of it. Sebastian told her he wanted 1 more day before calling anyone together. Time enough, he said, to be certain he was doing this because it was right, and not only because he was angry. Imani, unaware of how far the investigation had already gone, spent Wednesday evening finishing her contracts exam. She missed one question on indemnification language, by a margin so narrow her professor mentioned it the next morning as the closest score in the class. She did not yet know how directly that same knowledge had already shaped the week unfolding quietly around her. Sebastian met Whitcomb privately Thursday afternoon in her office, expecting a difficult conversation and finding, instead, an honest one. Whitcomb told him, skipping most of the preamble, that she had spent 30 years being flattered by men who wanted things from her. She had forgotten, somewhere along the way, what it looked like when someone simply told her she was wrong. "I have thought about that housekeeper's face more than I have thought about your bill this week," she said. That is not a comfortable thing to admit to anyone. Sebastian told her Imani's name was Imani, not that housekeeper, and Whitcomb, to her credit, wrote it down carefully. She confirmed, before he left, that she intended to move the port bill out of committee within the month. Unrelated, she said pointedly, to Saturday night, though both of them understood that was not entirely true between them. Friday evening, Sebastian convened the family's senior partners in the estate's dining room, the same room where difficult decisions had been made for 3 generations before him. Roland arrived expecting a conversation about the bill's revival and found, instead, Renee already seated with a folder in front of her. Sebastian laid out the timeline in a voice that never once rose. There was the terrace call to Hensley's main office 9 days before the party, and the indemnification agreement dated 2 days before Roland ever added the associate to the guest list. There was also the county filing naming Roland as an authorized representative. Roland's first response was flat denial. "That is a consulting arrangement completely unrelated to this family's business," he said. "I am permitted outside clients. Nobody in this room has ever objected to that before tonight." Sebastian said the arrangement indemnified Hensley specifically against claims arising from information about Kane Maritime's port strategy, language that had no reasonable place in an unrelated consulting contract. Roland's composure sharpened rather than cracked under the pressure. "This whole presentation has the feel of a man looking for someone to blame for a crisis he created himself Saturday night," he said, looking around the table at the senior partners gathered there. "Ask yourselves whether losing your temper at a sitting senator and then needing a villain to justify it is really the pattern you want running this family's political relationships going forward." One of the senior partners, an older man named Foster who had served 3 generations of Kane leadership, asked evenly whether Roland could explain the 9-day gap between the Hensley arrangement and the guest list edition. Roland's jaw tightened, the first real crack in an otherwise composed face all evening. "If this family wants to end 15 years of loyal service over an outside consulting contract," he said, his voice rising now, "then perhaps this family should ask itself one more question. What would a public dispute with its own longtime strategist do to the very bill you are all so eager to protect right now?" "That is not loyalty," Sebastian said. "That is a threat, and it is the clearest answer you have given all night." Roland did not speak for a long moment. When he finally did, the practiced smoothness had gone out of his voice entirely. "I have spent 15 years making other people look competent in rooms I was never invited to sit in as an equal," he said. "I asked this family once for something of my own, a council seat, a real seat, and I was told to wait, the way I have always been told to wait, by every family I have ever served. Hensley offered me a campaign to run with my name on the letterhead instead of buried in someone else's speech. I took it. I am not going to pretend I regret wanting that, even now." Sebastian did not raise his voice. "You are right that this family should have answered you honestly instead of leaving you waiting," he said. "That failure belongs to us. But you chose to answer it by selling the timing of our port strategy to the one firm actively trying to take it from us, and that choice belongs to you alone." Sebastian confirmed that outside counsel had reviewed the indemnification filing overnight and found its language indefensible under any legitimate consulting arrangement. The senior partners voted at once, with no further debate, to remove Roland from every political and business relationship he managed on the family's behalf, effective immediately. They referred the indemnification filing to outside counsel for review, a process Foster warned would likely cost Roland his law license within the year. Roland left the estate before midnight, escorted by Renee, his 15 years of painstakingly built relationships ending in one evening. Sebastian found Imani afterward in the same kitchen where she had iced her wrist 5 nights earlier, and told her, plainly, everything the evening had settled. She listened all the way through, then asked him why he had told her the truth instead of the shorter, easier version most people in his position would have given her. "Because you would have found the longer version anyway," he said. You always do. May I? He asked, reaching for her hand the way he had clearly been waiting several days to ask permission for. Imani laced her fingers through his and said nothing at all, answering him the only way that mattered between them. The port expansion bill advanced out of Whitcomb's committee 3 weeks later with bipartisan support, a result that surprised almost nobody who had watched Whitcomb's public statements since the gala. She sent Imani a short, handwritten note along with the vote announcement, apologizing plainly for Saturday night and enclosing a business card for a legal aid clinic her office worked with regularly. Imani kept the card on her desk for a week before deciding, on her own, that she would call the number herself. She would do it once she had her certificate in hand, rather than let the senator's gesture decide the timing. Within 2 months, Roland was under formal investigation by the State Bar's Disciplinary Council, while Kane Maritime's outside lawyers separately prepared a civil claim over the leaked port strategy. The senior partners folded his responsibilities among 3 younger staffers rather than naming a single successor. It was a structural change Sebastian insisted on personally, a way of making sure no one person managed that much of the family's political relationships unsupervised again. Imani finished her paralegal certificate that spring, working night shifts at the household around a course load that grew lighter as her final exams approached. Sebastian never once offered to fund her tuition outright, a fact she noticed and respected more than she said aloud. He did write her a reference letter for the legal aid clinic, unprompted, describing her attention to language in terms she suspected were more accurate than flattering. When the clinic offered her a paralegal position that summer, she gave her notice at the estate with more relief than guilt, and Sebastian accepted it, not once trying to change her mind. "I am not asking you to choose between the two of us," she told him plainly, the week before her last shift there. "I decide what my career looks like, and you get to support that from wherever you happen to be standing, not from in front of it." He agreed at once, and kept that promise through her first demanding months at the clinic, showing up with dinner on her hardest nights and staying out of her way on her best ones. 6 months after the night a senator closed her hand around Imani's wrist, Imani moved into a small apartment near the clinic. It sat close enough to walk to 12-hour days and far enough from the estate to feel like her own life, rather than an extension of his. Sebastian visited on the evenings she was free, never assuming, always asking first, learning slowly what it meant to need someone, and to let her keep full ownership of what she gave him in return. Her mother, who had once fought a landlord for 3 years with paperwork nobody explained to her clearly, came to Imani's modest certificate ceremony that winter. She told Sebastian, with little warning, that she approved of him, though she would be watching closely regardless. If someone in a position of power ever treated you as beneath their notice, would you want the people around you to stay silent, or to speak up in the room where it actually mattered? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe for more stories about dignity, respect, and the people who refuse to look away. Thank you for listening to this story. I wish you peace, always. I am Sunny, and I love you.